I'm Dr. Pradeep Raina from the Department of Pediatric and Preventive Dentistry in IIM Sankara Dental College. Today I'll be discussing with you the topic pediatric minor oral surgery. So coming to the contents of the seminar, we'll be discussing a lot of topics today. So moving on to introduction. So surgery performed on pediatric patients involve a number of special considerations unique to this population. So behavioral guidance of children in the operative and pre-operative periods presents a special challenge for us dentists. So special attention should be given to the assessment of social, emotional, and psychological status of a pediatric patient prior to a surgery. So children have very many unvoiced fears concerning the surgical experience, and their psychological management requires that the dentist should be cognizant of their emotional status. And answering the questions concerning the surgery is important and should be done in the presence of the parent. So the potential for adverse effects of growth from injuries and/or surgery in an oral and a maxillofacial region markedly increases the risk and complication in pediatric population. Injuries in the mandibular condyle result in restricted growth but also limit the mandibular function as a result of ankylosis. So surgery involving maxilla and mandible of young patients is complicated by the presence of developing tooth follicles, and alteration or deviation from standard treatment modalities may be necessary to avoid injuring these follicles. So minor oral surgery has been defined as a surgical procedure that can be comfortably done by competent non-specialized dental surgeon within 30 minutes under LA with or without sedation. So moving on to the preoperative evaluation. So we'll be seeing lots of different subtitles under it. So first one is the medical part. So we obtain the thorough medical history from the patient, anticipating and preventing any emergency situations that might arise, and being prepared to treat the emergency situation. Coming to the dental part, we have it is important to perform a thorough clinical and radiographic preoperative evaluation of the dentition as well as extraoral and intraoral soft tissue examination to minimize the negative effects of surgery on the developing dentition. This is very important. So we'll be moving on to different types of your pediatric minor oral surgery. So the first one is the simple exodontia or your simple extraction. So it is the painless removal of entire tooth or tooth root with minimal trauma to the investing tissue so that the wound heals uneventfully without postoperative problems. So what are the indications for a simple exodontia? So badly carious teeth, retained primary teeth, infection in the periapical region that cannot be treated without extraction. For orthodontic purpose, rudimentary supernumerary teeth found in the radiograph. In traumatic injury to teeth, if vertical fracture occurs, ankylosed primary teeth, impacted teeth, and ectopically cushioned that cannot be brought into function. So what are all the contraindications? We have relative contraindication and also absolute contraindication. So the relative contraindications include local factors like your acute infections like stomatitis, acute Vincent's infections, hepatic stomatitis, acute peristomatitis, acute dentoalveolar abscess, acute cellulitis, and malignancy. Systemic factors include acute or chronic rheumatic heart disease, congenital heart disease, and kidney disease require a proper antibiotic coverage and consultation with a physician. The child having bleeding diseases, only after consultation with the hematologist is allowed for any simple extraction procedure. If the child has diabetes mellitus, the diet should be retained with the same qualitative and quantitative composition after the period of extraction. Absolute contraindications include hemangioma and arteriovenous fistula. So before moving on to extraction, we should know the basic differences between a primary and permanent teeth so that we'll be able to adapt the procedure to pediatric patient. So the size of primary teeth is smaller in every dimension when compared to the permanent teeth. The shape, the crowns are more bulbous, and the percussion of the primary root is positioned more cervically than the permanent. Physiology of the root, the primary tooth has the property of the root being resolving naturally, but the permanent teeth, the roots don't resolve naturally. Coming to the support, the bone of the alveolus is much more elastic in a younger patient when compared to an old patient. So what are all the modifications that can be done for a pediatric exodontia? So the type of forceps, their beaks and handles are smaller to accommodate more bulbous crowns. The beaks are more curved in forceps designed for removal of primary teeth. Wide splaying of primary molars roots means that there is more expansion of socket is required. And due to relatively cervical position of the bifurcation in primary molars, it is injurious to use forceps with deep plunging beaks. And avoiding we should always avoid blind investigation of the primary socket, and because of psychological resorption, it is often preferable to leave small fragments in situ if root fracture is seen. So moving on to the important part of preparing the parent and child towards nexrodontia. So we should instruct the parent not to discuss with the child that the periodontist will do, as the parent's choice of words may be poor, which may unintentionally make the child fearful. So we should reassure the parent that post-operative pain usually doesn't occur much when primary tooth is removed. 8 to 10-year-old age group adjust better for extraction when they are told 4 to 7 days prior to the procedure. However, a younger child should be told on the day of the appointment about the procedure, and before giving the LA, we should always explain to the child about the sensation of pain. We should explain it as a sensation of pinching or an hand biting. Extremely important that the child realizes the difference between pressure and pain. So we should be able to explain to them the difference between the two, and we should be able to show them also. When checking for anesthesia, by placing the elevator on the gingival crevices, note the eye reaction of the child. Moving on to operator position. When removing each individual teeth, it is important to note the position of the operator. For maxillary right tooth extraction, the operator should be in front and to the side. In case of maxillary left, it is to the front and to the side. Mandibular right, the operator should stand back of the patient and to the side. And mandibular left, the operator should be in front of the patient and to the side. Coming to the property of your non-working hand. So your non-working hand, it should always support your alveolar bone when you are extracting the tooth. So it is used to retract the soft tissues to allow visibility and access. It protects the tissues if instrument slips. It provides resistance for extraction forces on the mandible to prevent any dislocation. And it provides a feel to the operator during extraction and gives information about resistance of removal. So what are all the forces that are used during extraction? So in case of maxillary posteriors, because of the curved palatal root, mild palatal force should be given, then a single sustained force in the buccal direction, and the tooth is loosened in a counterclockwise motion, and it delivers out of the socket. In case of maxillary anteriors, the cross section of the root is round, so initial apical pressure, then a slightly lingual with counterclockwise rotation is done. In case of mandibular posteriors, the cross section of the root is flat, mesiodistally, and elliptical. Therefore, any rotatory motion is contraindicated. So, initial lingual force is given, then sustained single force to the buccal unit until it is loosened. After loosening, a counterclockwise rotation delivers the tooth out of the socket. Mandibular anteriors, the cross section is oval. So, therefore, there is after the initial apical force, direction of is in the label in the single sustained motion. After the tooth is loosened, counterclockwise motion delivers the tooth out of its socket. Coming to the post-operative instruction that you should give the parents as well as the patients. So they should not be dismissed until a blood clot is formed. And when changing a blood-soaked gauze, the removed gauze is immediately disposed of out of the sight of the child. The child must be instructed not to bite his lips, and they should not disturb the area where the tooth was removed. They should be asked not to rinse for 24 hours after extraction and not to take juices with straw. They should be reinforced of all the instruction given, and which is given to the child as well as the parent. A light meal with no hot food should be recommended for that day. Analgesic is prescribed if extraction was traumatic, and antibiotic coverage if it is infected alone. Blood can appear on the pillow the next day or so. This shows that slight oozing of blood from the healing socket that gets mixed with the saliva and given the appearance of a large quantity of blood. So they should be asked to not be frightened. Moving on to the next one, which is the extraction of the impacted tooth. So impacted teeth will include supernumeraries are treated in children for several different reasons. So they are extracted maybe due to symptomatic reasons like pain, radiographic signs of pathology, that is any dentigerous cyst formation, or part of an orthodontic treatment plan. So these are all the factors in which an impacted teeth is extracted. So for extraction of the impacted teeth which is present within the bone, a flap design should be done, and the flap design should be having these properties. So it should be mucoperiosteal, it should be cut 90 degrees to the bone and have a good blood supply. and it should avoid damage to important structures and allow atraumatic reflection. It should provide adequate access and visibility and should permit reapposition of the wound margins over sound bone. So here are some of the pictures of your buccally placed flaps for teeth. So first design is your gingival margin as the horizontal component and the vertical relief incision is given to the depth of the buccal surface. In the second design, a semilunar incision that is given here. So it is in which at least 5 mm of the attached gingiva should be maintained at the narrowest point to ensure a good blood supply to the marginal gingiva. Next, for flap design for palatally or lingually placed teeth, the palatally positioned teeth are best removed via an incision that follows the palatal gingival margin. Such an incision would maintain integrity of the gator palatine nerve and vessels. And in lower jaw, adequate access to the lingual site is obtained by raising the lingual gingiva and reflected mucosa via the incision running along the lingual gingival margin. In case of bone removal, it can be done by using handpiece and burr or by the use of chisels. So tooth removal, once sufficient bone is removed, only tooth removal is done. So once the sufficient amount of bone is removed, it will allow easy identification of the tooth to be extracted. Exposure of the greatest diameter of the crown is done before the tooth is elevated. Suturing is done following the completion of the procedure. Next, what are all the complications that might arise due to extraction of impacted teeth? So post extraction hemorrhage might be there. Infection and dry socket might arise. The patient might experience pain later on. They might experience numbness and referred pain. Next, moving on to the next topic, that is your lesions of the newborn. So oral pathologies include occurring in newborn children include 4 of them. So we have Ebsen's pearls, dental laminasis, bones nodules, congenital epilepsy. So Ebsen's pearls are common and found in 75 to 80% of newborns. They occur in median palatine raphe area as a result of trapped epithelial remnants along the line of fusion of the palatal halves. Dental laminasis are found at the crest of the dental ridge, and it is most commonly seen bilaterally in the region of the first primary molars. And as they result as a remnant of the dental lamina. Next, the bones nodules, they are remnants of the salivary gland epithelium and usually are found in the buccal and lingual aspects of the ridge away from the midline. So no treatment is required for all of these conditions as these cysts usually disappear within the first 3 months of life. So next we have some pictures of these lesions. So we have the Epstein pearls, which is present along the median raphe. Then we have the dental laminasis, which is present in the molar area, and bones nodules here. Next, coming to lesions of the erupting dentition. So these include all erupting complications like erupting cyst, eruption hematoma, natal and neonatal pain. So they occur throughout childhood in association with erupting of deciduous and permanent dentition. So small intraoral hemangiomas of buccal mucosa and alveolar ridge that may appear in infants should be considered as they are usually not present at birth but appear within the first few months of life. The eruption cyst is a soft tissue cyst that results from a separation of dental follicle from the crown of an erupting tooth. It is associated with natal teeth in newborn infant and also occurs in association with the eruption of deciduous and permanent. They appear as clear or blood-tinged fluid filled masses on the crest of the alveolar ridge. So they interfere with feeding or which will bleed intermittently when traumatized, but are usually it is asymptomatic. So these eruptions they usually disappear when underlying tooth erupts, and it should be unroofed and drained if the lesion becomes painful or infected, or if the lesion bleeds and the natal teeth is removed. So simple incision or a partial excision of the overlying tissue to expose the crown and drain the fluid is indicated when underlying tooth is not erupting or the cyst is enlarging. Next, moving on to the natal and neonatal teeth. So natal teeth, these are teeth which are present at birth, whereas the neonatal teeth are the teeth which will erupt within the first 30 days after birth. So these are the most important point to consider when dealing with natal and neonatal teeth is whether the nursing mother can adequately establish breastfeeding. If there is a traumatization of the nipple of the mother, or if the ventral surface of the infant's tongue is traumatized, then the tooth should be removed. If the tooth is not too mobile, then it should be retained as it can become firm with time as the root continues to develop. So if the tooth is excessively mobile because of theoretical risk of aspiration or ingestion, it should be electively removed. If the tooth removal is indicated, care should be taken to extract the entire tooth as the crown only may be removed, leaving behind some pulpal tissue. If this happens, the dentin and root will form, for which the root should be removed at a later time. Permanent teeth should be unaffected by extraction of the primary tooth. When removing these teeth, it is always protect the airways by placing a gauze at the back of the mouth as they are easily dislodged or dropped. A pair of Spencerville's forceps that is given here or similar will provide firm grip on the tooth to be removed, and check the medical history for any significant jaundice that may predispose to post-operative bleeding. Moving on to the next topic, that is the apical abscess. So an abscess is a non-specific inflammatory response to presence of bacteria in normally sterile tissues. It is localized purulent form of apical periodontitis, and it is characterized by the fluxion, buccal, or palatal swelling with or without draining fistula. So regional adenopathy is usually present, and if persists draining, pain is usually not severe. Coming to the treatment of apical abscess, so in case of apical abscess is there, acute incision and drainage of the fluxant area is done, and definitive therapy, say pulpectomy or extraction of the appending tooth, and antibiotic therapy is important. Moving on to the next topic, which is eruption gingivitis. So it is a transitionary type of gingivitis, which is often observed in young children when primary or permanent teeth is erupting. So it is localized, and it is associated with difficult eruption. So it subsides after the teeth emerges into the oral cavity. So what is the incidence of this eruption gingivitis? So the greatest increase in incidence of gingivitis in children is often seen in ages of 6 to 7 year age group, where the permanent teeth begins to erupt. So this inflammation is most commonly associated with eruption of first and second permanent molars, and the condition can be painful. So causes of eruption gingivitis, it includes the increase in gingivitis it is apparently occurs because of the gingival margin receives no protection from the coronal contour of the tooth during early stage of active eruption. So in this stage, where food debris, materia alba, and bacterial plaque often collect around or beneath the free tissue, partial covering the crown of an erupting tooth cause development of inflammatory process. So what are the clinical features that you can expect in an eruption gingivitis case? So the patient will experience pain. There will be redness of the gingiva, swelling of the gingiva will be seen, bleeding on probing will be there, anorexia and dysphagia is seen, and it usually heals after complete eruption of the tooth. And in case of molar, if pericoronitis develops, then first discharge sometimes is associated with lymph node enlargement and fever. Coming to the treatment of eruption gingivitis, we have in cases of mild eruption gingivitis, it requires no treatment other than improved oral hygiene. In case of painful eruption, uh, in case of painful eruption gingivitis, it is managed by oral hygiene measures, and instruction along with systemic antibiotics and NSAIDs are given. And in case of the condition may be helped when the area is irrigated with the counter irritants such as peroxide. Moving on to pericoronitis. So pericoronitis is defined as inflammation of oral soft tissues surrounding the crown of the partially erupted tooth. So major cause is the food and debris infection and microbial flora that develops in the distally located pseudopocket. So the tissue appears red, swollen, and a suppurating lesion that is exquisitely tender with radiating pain to the ear and throat and floor of the mouth. So it is associated with fever and lymph node enlargement, and cellulitis and trismus can also occur. So what are all the complications that might arise due to this pericoronitis? So pericoronitis often leads to pericoronal abscess. It may spread posteriorly in the oropharyngeal region. It can cause dysphagia, involvement of the lymph nodes, posterior and deep cervical region. Peritonsillar abscess can be there, and Ludwig's angina can also develop. So what is the treatment for this pericoronitis? So the main treatment is extraction of the offending tooth. And if it is not severe condition, we can do upper colectomy. So upper colectomy is usually contraindicated in acute condition, and this acute condition which is eliminated by giving NSAIDs to relieve the pain, such as your acetaminophen and ibuprofen. And systemic antibiotics when fever and lymph node enlargement is present, that is penicillin, erythromycin, cephalosporin, etc., can be given. And patient is always asked to maintain proper oral hygiene by giving oral hygiene instructions. So coming to the treatment, so upper colectomy is indicated, and scaling the gingival pocket to remove any plaque as well as the infection pus after removing the operculum using a scalpel blade number 11. So then it is irrigated with hydrogen peroxide at 3% solution and saline 0.9% solution. And the patient is asked to continue taking the prescribed antibiotics for 3 more days and rinse regularly with warm saline. Finally, we should ask the patient to report to us and we should reevaluate the surgical site. Moving on to the next topic, which is mucocele. So oral mucocele is a cavity of mucus that develops in association with a salivary gland. So it may be a retention cyst or extravasation phenomena depending on etiological and histopathological features. So the most common benign salivary gland problem in children is your mucocele. So the lesion is usually a pseudocyst and it doesn't have a epithelial line. So what is the main cause of your mucocele? The main reason is mainly due to trauma. So mucocele is a common lesion in children and adolescents resulting from a rupture of the minor salivary gland excretory duct with subsequent leakage of the mucin of the salivary gland into the surrounding connective tissue, and later it will be surrounded by a fibrous capsule. So when the duct is totally or partially obstructed, there is an accumulation of saliva behind the obstruction and the retention cyst develops. And this collection of mucus is surrounded by a duct epithelium, and therefore it is defined as a true cyst. So what are all the clinical features of a mucocele? So mucocele is usually well circumscribed bluish translucent fluctuant swellings that are firm in palpation. The color ranges from normal to whitish keratinized surface, and the mucoceles usually frequently are observed in the lower lip and usually lateral to the midline. Mucoceles can also be found in the buccal mucosa, ventral surface of the tongue, retromolar region, and floor of the mouth. And superficial mucoceles are short-lived lesions that burst spontaneously, leaving shallow ulcers that heal within a few days. So many lesions, however, require treatment to minimize the risk of recurrence. So what is the technique for removal of a mucocele? So the size of the mucocele should be considered before removing it in the cheek, lip, or palate. So unroofing is a choice of treatment of larger ones, whereas dissection is appropriate for moderate size. The mucocele is excised in an elliptical fashion where the dissection is continued till the plane which is adjacent to the capsule down to the muscular layer, and all the marginal glands and the associated gland tissue are removed before primary closure. So here are pictures which is given for the procedure of mucocele removal. So first we are visualizing the mucocele here. Then excision is lower lip is held firmly with the help of a gauze. Then an incision is placed, and the tissue is removed using your tissue holding forceps. Then after we have removed all the associating salivary glands, the sutures are placed, and after suturing we can see it here. So the excised tissue can be given to the biopsy also for further analysis. So what are all the complications which might arise due to removal of your mucocele? So mucocele is has a high chance of recurrence, and it is the most common complication of mucocele removal. And excision of the lower lip may be harmful to the labial branches of the mental nerve. Moving on to the next topic, which is ranula. So ranula is a mucocele in the floor of the mouth. So the name ranula is derived from the Latin word ranula pippins, which means frog. So the elevation of the tongue by fluid-filled pseudocyst, which is seen here in this picture, is similar to the appearance of a frog's tongue. So what are the clinical features of a ranula? So ranula appears in children and toddlers are congenital as a result of dilation of the sublingual or submaxillary gland in the floor of the mouth, whereas those appearing in older children are usually traumatic. So ranulas are it is characteristic is located in the sublingual space between the mylohyoid muscle and lingual mucosa. They may be occasionally extend into the submental and submandibular region by perforating through the mylohyoid muscles, and then it is called as plunging ranula. So what is the technique of removal for this ranula? So small ranulas can be excised. However, larger ones should be observed for several months until the lining is matured before we can undertake any treatment. Plunging ranula often requires excision of the sublingual gland to prevent any recurrence. So here we have some pictures and the procedure for removing of ranula. So first, the distinct fibrous lining, we should check whether it has developed or not. Once it has developed, the roof of the pseudocyst is excised and the cavity is strained. So root of the pseudocyst is excised and cavity is strained, and the mature lining is identified and sutured to the raw edge of the mucosa. The cavity floor is explored for the entire depth and the source of the extravasation, and then the cavity is packed with the gauze, as shown here. It is packed with gauze, and then to the depth. Then the gauze should be left in place for 7 to 10 days. So, what is the reason for the placement of gauze? It is to induce foreign body response to the gauze, which will produce fibrous tissue that will seal off any leak from the associated acini, and therefore the acini eventually becomes atrophic. So an important process during this is during the process of marsupialization is that the submandibular duct is identified and cannulated. Then the lesion is marsupialized to allow free drainage and to avoid damage to the submandibular ducts and the sublingual glands, blood vessels, and nerves in the floor of the mouth. Moving on to the next topic, that is the odontogenic cyst. So odontogenic cysts in children are most commonly associated with impacted teeth such as denture cyst. The canines are more frequently involved in children than the third molars. And in late, mixed, and early permanent dentition, dentigerous cyst, it is associated with impacted premolars and second permanent molars. In teenagers, the dentigerous cyst mostly involves the impacted wisdom teeth, and lateral periodontal and residual cysts are rare in childhood. So odontogenic cysts are usually discovered when a permanent tooth has not erupted into the oral cavity on time. So in radiograph that is taken, the cyst appears as a radiolucent area outlined by a thin radiopaque line. To avoid missing the cyst with a deep impacted tooth, a panoramic X-ray is most useful. So the treatment for this odontogenic cyst includes marsupialization. So it is indicated when the cyst is very large and its removal may cause pathological fracture or devitalize the adjacent teeth. So the procedure is basically involves the removal of part of the lining of the cyst, establishing a drainage. Then the lesion reepithelializes after formation of granulation tissue and shrinks in size. A ribbon gauze is placed in the cavity and the cyst is then enucleated. And the extra care is required on part where the patient keeps the cavity clean and prevent infection. So cyst enucleation is done in case of smaller cysts. So the envelope flap is raised and the reflection is done such that the sound bone has been reached all around and the proposed bony opening is seen. Often the bone will be perforated by the expanding cyst or just a thin layer may be present covering it. As far as possible, the cyst should be removed in one piece and the cystic lining should be separated from the bone and excess bone is removed to facilitate its removal. A biangle spoon excavator are used to separate the lining of the bone and adherence of the cyst to a neurovascular bundle or adjacent teeth should be checked. After checking the vitality of the adjacent teeth, the need for apicoectomy and root canal treatment should be evaluated. Coming to the next topic, that is maxillary frenectomy. So the superior labial frenum is a triangular fold of tissue that originates in the lip and inserts in the attached gingiva at the maxillary midline. It is a remnant of the embryological structures that is the tectolabial glands. So the frenectomy is a complete excision of frenum, and the term frenectomy indicates partial removal, that is a relocation. Coming to the etiology, so this an apical relocation usually takes place during normal growth of the alveolar process, but an abnormal frenal attachment may be seen between the central incisors when this migration fails. So here we can see that due to the failure, we can see the frenum which is placed too cervically when compared to normal frenum which is present more gingivally. So clinical features of this condition: a prominent maxillary frenum in children, although a common finding, is often a concern, especially when associated with a diastema. And interference with the oral hygiene measures, aesthetics, and psychological reasons are contributing factors that relate to treatment of this maxillary frenum. So, how do you diagnose that the frenum is abnormal or not? So, an abnormal frenum will appear excessively wide or it will be attached especially close to the gingival margin. So, lack of apparent zone of attached gingiva along the midline may be observed, and stretching of the upper lip and observing the movement and schema or blanching of the interdental and/or palatal tissues may be helpful. When an hypertrophic frenum is associated with the incomplete fusion of the intermaxillary suture, the contour of the alveolar process between the central incisors is W shape or irregularly overt shape instead of the normal V shape. So, what are all the indications for removal of this frenum? So, the main indication for removal are when the frenum restricts the lip movement and the frenal attachment that prevents the closure of the midline diastema. It is also indicated for removal in cases where the frenal attachment prevents the mechanical tooth cleansing. In such condition, a frenectomy should be considered. What is the timing for removing or performing the frenectomy? So the timing is dependent on the indications for removal. In case of maxillary midline diastema, there are different options for timing of the removal. So in case the first alternative is initial diastema closure by the orthodontic treatment, followed by removal of the frenum and retention appliances. Then the wound contraction will contribute to the retention of the treatment result. Second option is to remove the frenum before the end of the active orthodontic treatment. This is performed when the frenum may inhibit the orthodontic closure of the midline diastema. In both of these cases, the removal is usually done after the eruption of the permanent canines and/or the lateral incisors. So the maxillary frenectomy is usually done using two procedures, that is your simple frenectomy and a Z-plasty. So simple frenectomy, an incision is made along the base of the frenum as shown here by the dotted lines and its attachment to the incisive papilla. So the dissection is carried out to the periosteal level and extended on both sides of the frenum to the attachment of the labial mucosa. The frenum is then excised as shown here. Frenum is excised and the results in a bell-shaped defect as shown here in this clinical picture. There is a bell-shaped defect here. So edges of the wound are undermined and the labial flaps are closed with 5.0 chromic catgut sutures, and diamond-shaped defect in the attached gingiva is allowed to heal by secondary intention. Next is your Z-plasty. So Z-plasty involves excision of the frenum and making two oblique incisions. As seen here, there are two oblique incisions. Sorry. So two oblique incisions are placed down, and the resulting triangular flaps are interchanged or sutured in a reverse position. Next, we have ankyloglossia. So ankyloglossia is a developmental anomaly of the tongue characterized by prominent lingual frenum attachment, which is high on the lingual alveolar ridge. The thick lingual frenum resulting in the limitation of the tongue movement, partial ankyloglossia, or by the tongue appearing to be fused to the floor of the mouth, that is total ankyloglossia. So this condition is also called as tongue tie, and its reported prevalence is 0.1 to 10.7% of the population. So ankyloglossia is diagnosed either through clinical observation or parents when they are telling their history. So these two are sufficient to diagnose the condition, and the frenum is often abnormally short and thick, and when with a decreased mobility of the tongue. So when the tongue is asked to be raised by the clinician, the patient with difficulty they'll show a heart-shaped tongue, which is seen during protrusion of the tongue out of the mouth. So the clinical features includes that there is a higher prevalence of nipple pain for the mothers feeding the infants with ankyloglossia than in mothers feeding infants without ankyloglossia. Some difficulties in articulation are evident, example rolling an R and pronouncing certain consonants and sounds. Other problems related to reduced tongue mobility may be discomfort, difficulties in licking the lips, keeping the teeth clean, etc. So because of the intense pulling, ankyloglossia can also be associated with gingival recession. And it has also been hypothesized that the tongue that is in low position may predispose for maxillary hypodevelopment and mandibular prognathism. These are typical features for class 3 malocclusions, and that ankyloglossia can indirectly cause this malocclusion. So frenal attachment may interfere with denture stability and dislodging the denture when tongue is moved. So coming to the procedure of frenotomy, so frenotomy is done in case of your ankyloglossia. So it is not associated with much discomfort and can be performed in with anesthesia even in children below 1 year of age. The tongue may be stabilized with holding the tongue with a gauze during the procedure, and the release of the frenum with several cuts with straight scissors is done. And the cut should be done in the uppermost free part of the frenum and extended posteriorly to close to the tongue until its mobility is increased sufficiently. And during this procedure, hemostats can be used to ensure hemostasis. Then frenectomy procedure. So it is performed by cutting the frenum from its alveolar ridge attachment and making parallel incision that is extending along the frenum. So a band of tissue is removed and relieving incisions are made at the junction of the floor of the mouth and the surface of the tongue. This lateral incision makes a defect to form a V with the apex facing towards the tip of the tongue. After undermining the wound edges, the wounds may be closed using with a Y shape using 5.0 chromic catgut sutures. Coming to the final topic, that is your apicoectomy. So it is a term which is used for surgery involving a root apex to treat apical infection. It is the removal of the apical portion of the root and curettage of the periapical necrotic, granulomatous, and inflammatory cystic lesions. So it is indicated in cases of apical anomaly of root apex, that is intracanal calcifications, dilacerations, and open apex. So root with broken instruments and overfillings, fracture of the apical third of the root, formation of periapical granuloma or cyst, draining of sinus tract or non-responsive teeth to RCT, extension of root canal sealant or cement filling beyond the apex. So these are all the conditions which indicate the procedure to be done. So contraindications include your presence of systemic diseases, teeth with deep periodontal pockets and great immobility, when traumatic occlusion cannot be corrected, and in cases of acute infection which is non-responsive to the treatment. So coming to the procedure in which we do your apicoectomy. So first, a success should be achieved. Local anesthesia and infiltration technique is given. So once everything is anesthetized, the area where of interest is given an incision. So mucoperiosteal flap, either semilunar or submarginal envelope flap, it is done, and the flap extended to at least one tooth on either side. So we should raise the mucoperiosteum with the periosteal elevator, retract the flap with the Langenbach or any suitable retractor. And after we are retracting, we should identify the apex of the intact buccal plate, create a bony window with a surgical burr over the root apex area. And the first outline of the bony window is marked by using burr holes with a round burr, which are later joined using a straight pressure burr, and care should be taken not to damage the adjacent roots. The root tip is sectioned horizontally less than 1/3 of the total root front and remove all the periapical granulomatous tissue with angulated curettes. And using a hot burnisher, the root tips are sealed and the flap is closed and sutured. So here we have all the procedures which is given in a diagrammatic as well as your clinical representation. So first a flap is raised. Then using a retractor, the flap is raised and the bony area is visualized. A bony window is created with a burr, and once the window is created sufficiently, all the granulomatous tissue is removed using your curettes. Then everything is sealed, which is done by using your obturator. Then finally, the flap is closed with your sutures. Moving on to the conclusion. So an understanding of principles of minor oral surgical techniques and the potential to prevent problems by regular early diagnosis are fundamentally important in treating pediatric patients. And we, the periodontists, need to be knowledgeable about the standard as well as the latest surgical techniques to handle them better. Thank you. These are my references for the presentation. Thank you for listening.